Why do women sometimes reject kind, available men, yet feel magnetically drawn to those who are cold, dismissive, even cruel? This script exposes the hidden psychological mechanisms behind attraction to cruelty, and how power, not kindness, often dictates desire. Power is rarely loud. It does not shout, it does not plead, and it does not explain itself. Yet when people speak of strong men, they often describe something else entirely. They describe emotional distance. They describe control without warmth. They describe a man who does not bend, even when bending would be human. And in the eyes of attraction, this is where the confusion begins. From the very first interaction, the mind searches for signals, not words, signals. Who leads, who reacts, who needs, and who can afford not to. A man who shows immediate availability, who offers reassurance before it is requested, who rushes to prove his worth, unintentionally answers these questions in the wrong order. He signals dependency before authority. And dependency, no matter how kind its intentions, is not read as strength. The cruel man, on the other hand, does not rush. He does not clarify his intentions. He does not soften his edges to be accepted. His calm is mistaken for confidence. His silence is mistaken for depth. His refusal to explain himself is mistaken for self-mastery. In truth, none of these things guarantee strength, but perception does not require truth. It only requires consistency. Machiavelli observed that people judge more with their eyes than with their minds. They respond not to what a man is, but to what he appears to be. And appearance, when repeated, becomes belief. A man who remains emotionally untouched by chaos seems powerful, even if his detachment is hollow. A man who withholds reactions appears unshakable, even if he is merely avoiding vulnerability. Here is where attraction quietly shifts. Emotional restraint begins to look like discipline. Indifference begins to look like self-respect. Cruelty, when controlled, begins to look like dominance. The line between strength and coldness blurs, because strength is difficult to measure, but control is easy to observe. Strength requires context. It requires time. It requires seeing how a man behaves when he could dominate, but chooses restraint. Power, however, needs no explanation. Power is visible in posture, in tone, in the absence of urgency. And the cruel man masters this illusion. He does not appear to seek approval. He does not negotiate his position. He acts as if his presence alone is sufficient. To the subconscious mind, this suggests hierarchy. And hierarchy creates attraction, not because cruelty is desirable, but because the mind associates leadership with emotional altitude. The one who reacts less appears to stand higher. The one who is less affected appears to hold control. The cruel man benefits from this misinterpretation because his emotional distance places him above the emotional exchange rather than within it. Kind men often lose here, not because kindness lacks value, but because kindness is frequently delivered without structure. When care is offered without limits, it collapses into appeasement. When empathy arrives before respect, it becomes submission. And submission, no matter how gentle, does not signal strength. It signals fear of loss. The cruel man appears to fear nothing, or at least he appears to fear less, and fearlessness, even when fabricated, commands attention. It suggests that this man has options, that he does not depend on this connection for validation, that he could walk away without consequence. This illusion alone can outweigh genuine character in the early stages of attraction. Machiavelli warned rulers never to reveal weakness before securing authority. In relationships, the same principle quietly operates. Those who reveal need before establishing presence surrender leverage. Those who remain composed while others reach forward gain psychological height. This is why power is so often mistaken for strength. Because strength is internal, invisible, and slow to reveal itself. Power is external, immediate, and easy to project. Cruel men exploit this distinction. They weaponize emotional restraint and present it as dominance. And until the illusion breaks, it feels convincing. The tragedy is not that women are drawn to cruel men. The tragedy is that strength has been redefined as emotional absence, that calm cruelty is mistaken for leadership, that control without compassion is allowed to masquerade as confidence. And so attraction follows the signal, not the substance, drawn upward toward the appearance of power rather than the reality of strength. Value is never created by abundance. What is always available is rarely cherished, no matter how pure its intention. This principle governs markets, empires, and the human heart with equal cruelty. When something can be accessed at will, it loses its gravity. When it can be taken for granted, it stops being pursued. And this is where scarcity becomes one of the most powerful and most misunderstood forces in attraction. The cruel man rarely offers himself in full. His attention arrives in fragments. His affection appears briefly, then disappears without warning. He does not flood the emotional space, he leaves gaps, and the mind, intolerant of emptiness, rushes to fill them. What is withheld becomes imagined, what is uncertain becomes magnified. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. He knew that people desire most what they cannot fully possess. The prince who is seen too often loses awe. The ruler who grants every request invites rebellion. Distance preserves authority, not because it is moral, but because it forces others to lean in. In relationships, scarcity operates the same way. A man who gives constant reassurance removes the challenge. A man who explains every silence eliminates mystery. A man who makes himself endlessly available erases tension. Without tension, desire collapses into comfort. And comfort, while safe, is rarely intoxicating. The cruel man does not reassure. He does not clarify. He does not resolve uncertainty. He allows questions to linger. And in doing so, he creates emotional investment without effort. The more someone wonders where they stand, the more energy they expend trying to secure their position. Scarcity does not merely increase value. It forces participation. This is not about cruelty itself, but about the psychological vacuum cruelty creates. When affection is inconsistent, the mind treats it like a rare reward. Each moment of warmth feels earned. Each sign of approval feels significant. The absence sharpens the presence. The less frequently something is given, the more intensely it is felt. Kind men often misunderstand this dynamic. They believe consistency builds security, and it does, but only after attraction has been established. Before that point, consistency without scarcity feels predictable. Predictability feels controllable, and what feels controllable is not perceived as valuable. The cruel man avoids this trap by refusing to be predictable. His behavior resists pattern. His emotional availability cannot be scheduled. This unpredictability forces constant attention. The other person becomes alert, engaged, watching closely for signs, reading meaning into tone, timing, and silence. Scarcity turns attention into obsession. Machiavelli wrote that men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their inheritance. Loss imprints more deeply than gain. Scarcity threatens loss, and the possibility of loss intensifies desire. The cruel man's withdrawal creates the fear of losing access, and fear, when mixed with attraction, amplifies attachment. This is why availability, when unlimited, can weaken desire. Not because care is unattractive, but because effort without resistance loses its edge. When nothing must be earned, nothing feels valuable. Scarcity introduces friction. Friction generates heat. Heat sustains desire. The cruel man often appears valuable not because he is superior, but because he is selective, or at least, he appears selective. By not giving freely, he implies that his attention is limited, that it must be deserved, that not everyone qualifies. This implication alone elevates his perceived worth. Even silence becomes currency. Even absence becomes communication. The less he gives, the more meaning is assigned to what remains. The mind begins to chase not the man, but the validation he withholds. Scarcity shifts focus from connection to conquest, from mutual presence to emotional achievement. And this is the quiet danger of scarcity. It transforms desire into pursuit. It makes attention feel like a prize rather than a shared experience. The cruel man benefits from this imbalance because he does not need to invest to remain valuable. His withdrawal does the work for him. Machiavelli would call this a strategic advantage, to be desired without effort, to be valued through absence, to rule not by generosity but by controlled distribution. In love, as in power, scarcity creates hierarchy. One who gives less stands higher. One who waits gains leverage. And until this illusion is exposed, scarcity will continue to manufacture value where substance may be absent. The human nervous system was never designed to distinguish clearly between danger and desire. It was built to react, not to reflect. Long before language, long before logic, the body learned one lesson above all others: heightened emotion means significance. Whether that emotion is fear or excitement matters less than the intensity with which it is felt. And this biological confusion lies at the center of why cruelty can feel magnetic. When the heart accelerates, when the breath shortens, when attention narrows, the body enters a state of arousal. The AME chemical messengers flood the system, whether one is standing at the edge of a cliff or locking eyes with someone unpredictable. Adrenaline does not ask why it has been summoned, it only amplifies experience. And the mind, searching for meaning, often labels intensity as attraction. The cruel man generates this intensity without effort. His unpredictability keeps the nervous system alert. His emotional withdrawal creates tension. His sharpness introduces risk, and risk awakens the body. Calm kindness rarely does this in the early stages, not because it lacks value, but because it lacks volatility. Safety soothes, but it does not electrify. Machiavelli understood that fear is a more reliable motivator than love. Fear keeps people vigilant, it sharpens focus, it prevents complacency. While he spoke of governance, the principle translates seamlessly into attraction. A person who introduces emotional risk becomes impossible to ignore. The body remains engaged, anticipating the next moment, preparing for impact. Cruelty introduces emotional instability, not chaos, but controlled threat. The possibility of rejection, withdrawal, or disapproval hovers constantly. This uncertainty keeps the nervous system activated, and activation creates attachment. The body begins to associate this person with heightened sensation, with meaning, with importance. This is where the confusion becomes dangerous. The body interprets stress as passion, anxiety as excitement, emotional turbulence as depth. The cruel man becomes associated not with peace, but with aliveness. Each interaction feels charged. Each exchange carries weight. The absence of emotional safety is mistaken for emotional significance. Kind men often fail to trigger this response. Their presence calms rather than excites. Their consistency lowers cortisol instead of raising adrenaline. And while this creates long-term stability, it does not always create immediate desire. The body does not mistake safety for thrill. It does not confuse comfort with urgency. The cruel man, however, never allows the nervous system to rest. He withholds affection, then releases it suddenly. He alternates between warmth and cold. This intermittent reinforcement deepens chemical dependency. Dopamine spikes unpredictably. The brain begins to crave the next reward, not knowing when it will arrive. Machiavelli would recognize this as control through emotional economy. Give just enough to keep hope alive. Withdraw just enough to maintain fear. The result is loyalty without force, attachment without commitment. The person becomes emotionally invested not because of joy, but because of anticipation. Fear sharpens memory. Moments tied to emotional stress are remembered more vividly. The cruel man becomes unforgettable not because he is kind, but because he is associated with heightened physiological states. The body remembers him as a source of intensity, and intensity, to the subconscious, equals importance. Over time, this pattern rewires expectation. Calm begins to feel empty. Stability begins to feel dull. The nervous system becomes accustomed to fluctuation. What once felt like danger now feels normal, and what feels normal becomes desirable. The cruel man benefits from this conditioning because he remains the source of stimulation. This is not a conscious choice. No one decides to be attracted to fear. The body responds before the mind can intervene. The chemicals fire, the heart races, the focus narrows. And by the time reason arrives, attraction has already formed. Machiavelli warned that people are governed more by emotion than by reason. And in matters of desire, emotion is king. The cruel man rules not through love, but through arousal, not through safety, but through stimulation. The body confuses the signal, and the mind follows, believing intensity must mean depth, believing fear must mean passion, believing that what shakes us must also move us. Long before society learned to call itself civilized, attraction was governed by hierarchy. Not morality, not fairness, not kindness, but position. Who stands above? Who commands space? Who can afford to lose? These instincts did not disappear with modern language or polished manners. They went underground, shaping desire quietly, beneath conscious values. In primitive structures, status determined survival. The individual who could dominate resources, repel threats, and remain unmoved by chaos was granted authority. Emotional softness was a liability, detachment signaled resilience, and cruelty, when controlled, functioned as evidence of power rather than failure of character. The cruel man unconsciously activates these ancient signals. His lack of emotional reactions suggests abundance. His indifference implies choice. His willingness to offend without fear of loss communicates one essential message: he does not depend. And dependency in hierarchical systems always places one below. Machiavelli understood that men submit not to the kindest ruler, but to the one who appears unchallengeable. Authority is not granted by compassion alone, but by the perception of dominance. In relationships, the same logic applies. The one who cares less appears higher. The one who risks less appears stronger. Cruelty, in this context, is not random aggression. It is emotional non-compliance, the refusal to accommodate, the refusal to seek approval. This resistance elevates status. The cruel man does not adjust himself to maintain harmony. Others adjust to him. Kind men often reverse this dynamic. They modify their behavior to preserve connection. They soften their boundaries to avoid conflict. They absorb emotional weight to keep peace. While this may be generous, it quietly signals subordination. In hierarchies, those who absorb pressure fall lower than those who apply it. The cruel man applies pressure through withdrawal, through silence, through disinterest. These acts communicate power because they demonstrate independence from outcome. He behaves as if losing the connection would not diminish him, and this perceived indifference is interpreted as high status. Status is never declared, it is inferred. People watch reactions, not words. Who flinches first? Who explains themselves? Who chases? The cruel man does none of these. His stillness becomes authority. His refusal to engage becomes dominance. Primitive instincts reward this. Attraction flows upward toward perceived strength. Not because cruelty is admired, but because it resembles leadership. In ancient groups, leaders were not chosen for empathy, but for their ability to withstand pressure and impose order. Emotional distance suggested immunity to chaos. The cruel man benefits from this misreading. His lack of empathy is mistaken for onal fortitude. His rigidity is mistaken for decisiveness. His unwillingness to compromise is mistaken for conviction. Each misinterpretation elevates his position within the relational hierarchy. Machiavelli warned that appearing weak invites challenge. Appearing strong discourages resistance. In attraction, appearing emotionally invulnerable discourages withdrawal by the other party. They lean in, seeking alignment with perceived power. They pursue proximity to status. Even pain becomes secondary. The mind tolerates discomfort if it believes proximity to power offers reward. This is why people remain drawn to those who mistreat them. Not because suffering is desired, but because status exerts gravity. The cruel man appears central. Others orbit. This hierarchy is reinforced by social comparison. If the cruel man seems unmoved by others, he appears selective. Selectivity implies value. Value implies rank, and rank intensifies attraction. The logic is ancient, efficient, and ruthless. Kindness can coexist with status, but only when it is offered from a position of authority. When kindness flows downward, it is respected. When it flows upward, it is expected. Cruel men rarely offer kindness freely, which preserves the illusion that when they do, it is earned. The danger lies in confusing dominance with worth. Hierarchies measure position, not character. Cruelty can elevate status temporarily, but it erodes trust. Yet attraction often forms before trust is evaluated. The primitive mind responds first, drawn to perceived power before questioning its cost. Machiavelli would advise understanding this mechanism rather than denying it. To know how hierarchy shapes desire, to see clearly. Cruel men rise in attraction not because they are better, but because they signal power in a language older than reason, a language the nervous system still obeys without asking permission. Now the pattern stands fully exposed. not as an excuse for cruelty, nor as an attack on desire, but as a mirror held to human nature without decoration. What draws attraction is not virtue alone, but perception, not kindness by itself, but power wrapped in restraint. What appears strong commands attention long before what is genuinely good earns trust. Women are not drawn to cruelty for the sake of pain. They are drawn to signals of control, of status, of emotional gravity. Cruel men exploit these signals, often unconsciously, by withholding, by remaining unmoved, by creating intensity where there should be clarity. The attraction forms before judgment intervenes, before values can speak. Machiavelli would remind us that people do not fall under the influence of what is right, but of what is effective. And cruelty is effective in the short term because it mimics strength, manufactures scarcity, ignites the nervous system, and elevates status within invisible hierarchies. It persuades without effort and dominates without explanation. But illusion cannot sustain order forever. Power without wisdom decays. Control without respect collapses. The same traits that attract eventually reveal their cost. Fear erodes loyalty. Scarcity breeds resentment. Emotional chaos exhausts desire. What begins as intensity ends as instability. True strength does not rely on cruelty. It does not need to confuse fear with attraction. It does not manipulate scarcity to feel valuable. Real power is the ability to remain grounded, decisive, and self-directed while still capable of restraint. It commands without wounding. It leads without withdrawing. To understand this is not to reject desire, but to master it. To see why attraction forms is to gain the freedom to choose differently. When the illusion fades, clarity emerges. And in clarity, attraction can finally align with character rather than control, with depth rather than dominance, with strength that does not need to harm in order to be felt